Hi, this is Jeff Curto, and welcome to episode number 176 of Camera Position, the podcast about the creative side of photography. It is not a matter of painting life. It's a matter of giving life to a painting. Well, those are the words of Richard Diebenkorn. Diebenkorn was born 1922 and he died in 1993, an American abstract expressionist painter, and his early work is associated with that form, that strategy of painting, abstract expressionism, and the Bay Area figurative movement of the 1950s and 1960s, the Bay Area, the western coast of California near San Francisco. And his later work, which is best known as the Ocean Park paintings, that later work was instrumental to his achievement of worldwide acclaim. Now, I've always liked Diebenkorn's work. I found his work to be really interesting when I was introduced to it way back in the 1980s, and have sort of thought about him from time to time and looked him up the other day to look for a painting that I wanted to look at. And as I was looking, I found some really interesting quotes that Diebenkorn had produced about the creative process. I'll give you one other little quotation here. He says, "I don't go into the studio with the idea of saying something. What I do is face I don't go into the studio with the idea of saying something. What I do is face the blank canvas and put a few arbitrary marks on it that start me on some sort of dialogue." So I won't go there right now to the idea that photographers are editors. Our job is to start with the sort of the whole world and edit down what it is that we don't need, remove that so that what we have left is the photographic information that we do need. And the difference between starting with a blank canvas, I suppose photographers who work in still life, as I have often done, we have to start with a blank canvas and create the objects that we photograph. But so I won't go there, but I think that idea, I don't go into the studio with the idea of saying something and, the idea of working on a dialogue with the work of art that he's making. So one of the things that I really found that I thought was just fascinating and relevant to our struggle with making photographs was a set of 10 ideas that he wrote down, and he called them Notes to Myself on Beginning a Painting. Notes to Myself on Beginning a Painting. And I'm going to read them to you, and then I'm going to go back through, decipher some of them. Some of them are pretty self-explanatory, easy for us to get. Others are a little less so. And I'll put these on the cameraposition.com blog and also in the PDF that comes along with the app so that you can follow along or at least have them as a reference point later on after you've heard the podcast. So I'm going to read them through, and then I'll kind of go back and see what we can learn from Diebenkorn talking about or writing himself notes to begin a painting. Notes to myself on beginning a painting. So here he is. Number 1, attempt what is not certain. Certainty may or may not come later. It may then be a valuable delusion. Number 2, the pretty initial position, which falls short of completeness, is not to be valued except as a stimulus for further moves. Number 3, do search, but in order to find other than what is searched for. Number 4, use and respond to the initial fresh qualities, but consider them absolutely expendable. Number 5, don't discover a subject of any kind. Number 6, somehow don't be bored, but if you must, use it in action. Use its destructive potential. Number 7, mistakes can't be erased, but they move you from your present position. Number 8, keep thinking about Pollyanna. Number 9, tolerate chaos. And number 10, be careful only in a perverse way. Pretty interesting ideas, right? Here's this guy, I kind of imagine him having this nailed or taped or, tacked or somehow affixed to the wall of his studio, and that he glances at them a little bit before he starts on a painting that he's about to begin. And certainly, again, the way that a painter works and the way that a photographer works are very different from one another. And yet, I think there are some really interesting ideas here. So let's kind of go back through these 10 notes that Diebenkorn made to himself on beginning a painting and see if we can kind of decipher some of what he said. So number 1, attempt what is not certain. Well, that's pretty self-explanatory. Attempt what is not certain, try something new. But then he goes on to say in this number 1, he says, certainty may or may not come later. It may then be a valuable delusion. Well, I kind of get that, right? There are a number of photographs that I've made where I think, wow, that's, pretty easy. That one's in the bag. It's in the can. I'm ready to go. I'm certain that is a great photograph. And I later discover that it's a valuable delusion, as Diebenkorn would have said. So certainty may or may not come later. It may then be a valuable delusion. But just the idea of attempting what is not certain to you. Number 2, the pretty initial position which falls short of completeness is not to be valued, except as a stimulus for further moves. And man, do I get that one. Because it's one that I've struggled with myself and one that I've worked with students with over and over my years of instructing in photography. And that initial impetus to make a photograph, especially because of our interest in making something beautiful, and we've talked about beauty and that idea in camera position episodes of the past, but that pretty initial position which falls short of completeness is not to be valued, says Diebenkorn, except as a stimulus for further moves. And that idea of trying to move past what is merely beautiful and invest it with some greater depth of meaning, greater depth of substance. So the pretty initial position which falls short of completeness, don't value that, he says, except as a stimulus for further moves. And in our case, I even think about moving ourselves, moving our camera position to a different spot. Number 3, do search, but in order to find other than what is searched for. I don't know how many times I've had this happen where I've sat down with, for example, a book of poetry about the natural world, and I may have read some beautiful poems about the natural world, but what I really discover is a sequence of words or an image that the poet has created for me, and that research is the research that actually motivates me to go and make photographs that kind of play to that idea. So he says, do search, but in order to find other than what is searched for. So probably leaving yourself open is another way to say that. Leave yourself open to what else might be there. And number 4, use and respond to the initial fresh qualities, but consider them absolutely expendable. It's kind of a similar way to say something that he's said already, right? Try something, initial fresh qualities, but try to recognize that they may just be ones that you toss out. And I don't know how many times I have, and I'm sure that some of you have had the same experience, confronting a subject and then ultimately throwing out your initial idea and moving in a completely different direction, which ultimately gets you to where you want to go. But in order to get there, you really had to kind of think it through in a sort of backwards kind of way. Don't discover a subject of any kind. Don't discover a subject of any kind. Well, wait a minute. For us photographers, that's a little tough, right? Because that is much of what we're about is subject matter discovery. But here I think that Diebenkorn again is talking about the need for us to remain open to the creative process and letting that creative process take us where it will, and that we should not allow ourselves to be sidetracked by temporary distractions, like the subject or the pretty initial position that he talked about up at the top of his list in number 2. He seems to be saying that certainty in art, or maybe even in life, can lead to a kind of paralysis. And I tend to agree that we're better off as creative people kind of living on that edge between certainty and doubt, certainty and uncertainty. Number 6, somehow don't be bored, but if you must, use it in action. Use its destructive potential. Well, I think we all have had that experience, right? Of being bored with our subject matter, being bored with our photographs, being bored with the place where we are, where we're making photographs. And I think what Diebenkorn is saying here is, if you're going to be bored, and everybody's going to be bored, use that to your advantage. And he says use its destructive potential. And I think when I think about myself and boredom, and I think of myself as being frustrated, sort of just a step off from being angry. So use that frustration, use that what he calls destructive potential to help move yourself forward. Number 7, mistakes can't be erased, but they move you from your present position. Well, that one's pretty self-explanatory, I think. We can't go back and change what we did wrong, but we can use that experience of doing something that didn't work out to move us forward to a different spot. Number 8, keep thinking about Pollyanna. Oh, I will tell you that this one mystified me just a little bit, so I had to look up Pollyanna. And I think what he's dealing with here is something that's called the Pollyanna Principle, sometimes called Pollyannism or positivity bias. And it's a tendency for people to remember pleasant items more accurately than unpleasant ones. And the idea that research indicates that at a subconscious level, the mind has a tendency to focus on the optimistic, while at the conscious level, it has a tendency to focus on the negative. This subconscious bias toward the positive is often described as the Pollyanna Principle. So he says, keep thinking about Pollyanna. And what I think he's really saying here is, keep thinking about the fact that at the subconscious level, you're thinking to yourself, oh, and that's going to be fine. Everything's going to work out. That's the best picture I can make here. That's the sort of solution to all of the problems. So that subconscious bias toward the positive, the Pollyanna Principle, is I think what he's looking at here. So he says, just remember, keep that tucked in the back of your head that your subconscious is always thinking, well, it's all going to be fine, when in reality you need to kind of work a little harder and find the deeper meaning of that subject. Tolerate chaos. Well, that one's easy. Right? We all live in some sort of chaotic situation at some point in our lives. No matter how ordered we all try to be, no matter how planned out we all try to have our lives, there is always some chaos. And so we have to tolerate that. And we have to tolerate the fact that oftentimes the creative process is not a linear process. It's not just like something where we started and then, wow, we got to the end of it and we were creative. The creative process is often a process of chaos. So he says you got to tolerate it, and I completely agree. And then lastly, he says, be careful only in a perverse way. And this is another one that caused me a little bit of concern to, trying to figure out what does he mean by that. Be careful only in a perverse way. And after looking at all of the meanings of the individual words here, I've kind of interpreted this note to mean to take care to deviate where necessary to bring life and energy into your work. Take care to really sort of think about the ways that you can really go outside the box. Be careful only in a perverse way. So, don't mess yourself up. But if you're gonna go outside the box, go outside the box. Jump way outside the box and try something that's way outside and see what happens. So I found these 10 notes to myself on beginning a painting by Richard Diebenkorn to be really interesting and really explanatory to me, even about the process that I undergo for myself about beginning something, even when it's walking outside of the house to go make some photographs, going to a location to make some photographs, setting up a still life to make photographs of. So I hope you found them to be interesting too. I'm going to leave you with one last Richard Diebenkorn quote, which I think we can all relate to. He says, "I can never accomplish what I want, only what I would have wanted had I thought of it beforehand." I love it. So thanks for joining me here on Camera Position, and I look forward to seeing you on the next episode of the podcast about the creative side of photography.